Alrighty, welcome back. Chapter 2. Hopefully you enjoyed the first chapter. You have now a more concrete sense of what peerScholar is all about, the process it supports, and hopefully you've also had a chance to join one of our virtual sessions and interact with us a little bit. If you haven't yet, take a look. We should have information available on this site where the course is, letting you know about when those virtual sessions are, and of course you're welcome to join any one at any time. Okay, so we're going to move on to Chapter 2. So Chapter 2 is going to be a series of three, I think, shorter videos. But what I'm hoping to do here is to give you a few tips with respect to, I guess, what you might call best practices, or at least options that faculty might want to consider when they're using peerScholar. These are ways to really kind of ratchet up the pedagogy in a variety of different ways. And so this first one, we're going to talk about how faculty can incorporate rubrics, or how they can actually ask students to use rubrics when they're assessing their peers, and the value that adds, both in terms of the learning that it supports and also in terms of the potential to measure that learning. So let's get right into it. Okay. A lot of what I'm going to tell you about today is inspired by me learning to play guitar. And something that I've noticed about the way they teach guitar that I think we could bring into our university setting and really add a little more oomph to what we're doing. So, of course, if you're trying to learn guitar, you're going to spend a lot of time practicing guitar. You're going to learn by doing it. So this is the kind of repeated, structured practice that I've been talking about all along. And yeah, you spend a lot of time doing that, but that's not all you spend time doing. Typically, if you do any sort of good guitar training program, they will also include something called ear training. Now, ear training is a sort of larger concept about learning to listen well, but in the more formal sense, the way it would work is usually with a teacher involved. A teacher would say, I want you to listen very carefully to some other musicians, and not just listen to them, but learn from them. And so a teacher might say, your homework today is to listen to the following solos. Here's a couple by Eric Clapton. Here's a couple by Santana. Go listen to them very carefully, and when you come back, tell me how they're different. What makes one sound like Eric and the other sound like Carlos? Okay, cool. Well, if you do that, you will start to notice little subtle differences in how they play. Things like how many notes. For example, Eric Clapton is known as slow hand because he doesn't play a whole lot of notes in his solos. Rather, he plays fewer notes and tries to really impart a lot of feel to the notes that he plays. B.B. King is another sort of famous example of that kind of guitar player. And so when you listen carefully to those guitar players, you learn a lot about things like vibrato, how to move your finger a little bit and make a note ring, and all these other characteristics that can make a single note blossom, let's say. If you listen to other ones, I could jump to maybe Metallica or something like that, then it might be more about, how many notes, or Eddie Van Halen, how many notes he can put into a place. And if you listen to Eddie Van Halen, when people first started listening to it, they were saying, what the heck is he doing? How is he making these sounds? And they learned about things called tapping and other things. The point being that when you listen carefully and analyze the work of another person in a very structured way, in a very deliberate way, you learn things that now can inform your practice and your playing, right? So the next time you're practicing soloing something, you can take what you learn by listening to others and implement it in your own work, in your own performance. So it's a bit of a cycle that happens between doing and listening, and analyzing the work of others. And so it's this that I want us to now consider bringing in the context of a peerScholar activity, because it already has a little bit of this cycle, but we can ramp it up a bit. Okay, so let's look at the context of creative thinking. So let's say we have an instructor that says, I really want to give my students good, powerful exercise thinking creatively. because I think this will help them in life, and it will. And so they come up with some activity that they want students to do. This is the production part, right? And so, let's imagine it's a video of some sort where we ask students to create a video, or create an image, if you will, something that encourages them to use their creativity as well as they can. And so they all produce this. Now, what are they going to do in the second phase? Well, they're going to assess each other's work, right? So they're going to look very carefully at the work of others, and they're going to try to provide some feedback. Now, this is the ear training, right? Peer assessment is that ear training part. And that's one of the things that makes peerScholar cool, is that it brings that into the learning environment. And so now we have that going on, and now we're going to ask students, go look for critical thinking here, creative thinking in the work of your peers. Now, the problem in some of these cases is that, and it's the same in music, until you have some expertise, you don't really understand what you're looking at or how to analyze it very well. And so we had Jack Black in the previous one as the teacher, as the music teacher, and that music teacher would kind of guide you. They would say, notice this person's doing that, or pay attention to how many notes they play, or something like that. And that would guide your analysis. This is where the rubric can come into play. Okay, so if instead of just asking students how much creativity is there, do you see, you could ask them to literally score the work using a rubric of some sort. So this might be a rubric that would be more applied to some sort of video that the person created that had human beings in it, because we're talking about actors and such. But the idea here, the more important idea, is to kind of direct the students to various elements of the piece, and to kind of give them a sense of, what separates a novice from a master in this case. And so this is guiding them. This is playing the role of the teacher as they're looking at the work of their peers. They're all doing so, first of all, in a very similar way. So we've kind of aligned all of our students, calibrated them to kind of be doing things in a similar way, looking for the same things, and it is helping them to kind of go through and look for things that matter. Look for things. This rubric was created by someone who claims that it's related to creative thinking, and so it can guide them in that exploration. Okay, now let me just emphasize there's two good reasons for doing this, or at least for considering doing this. And I hope you recall that in peerScholar there was that matrix tool. So you can actually create within the assessment a little matrix that students can use to score a rubric, right? And this is what I'm suggesting to you today, that when you're working with instructors, you might want to say, whatever you're asking students to do, is there a rubric for it? And what do you think of the idea of asking the students to apply the rubric to each other's work? Because you might want to consider that, because first of all, adding, and I shouldn't say adding the ear training, because it's always there in peerScholar, but it's formalizing it and structuring it a little more. And so when you do that, first of all, you're encouraging what we call a discovery mindset, right? You're asking the students to go looking for something and discover it. Oh, I just saw some evidence of creative thinking over there, and I saw some evidence of creative thinking over here. This is a fun, exploratory way of learning, and students like that. And so you're kind of encouraging that. Go out and look for creative thinking. And you're also, by the way, providing students with exemplars of what good work looks like. If they see somebody that's doing a great job and they're using the rubric and they're going, yep, they did that, yep, they did that, yep, they did that, this student is seeing very clear exemplars, both of very good work and of course of not so good work. But they get that additional piece, and those really powerfully good pieces. This is the Eric Claptons and the Carlos Santanas. You can learn things from them. Right? You realize what that person did, and you think, wow, I might not have ever thought about doing that if I hadn't seen it here, but I did see it here, and it's cool, and it's good, and I like it. And next time I'm in a situation where I have to be creative, I'm going to take some of that and bring it into my work. Fantastic. So that's the educational benefit of having the ear training and structuring it a little bit using a rubric. Okay. Now there's another benefit. This one's a little more complex, but let me say it this way. Let's say you were asked to create some creative composition and you submitted your creative composition. Now, while you're assessing, say, 5 of your peers, 5 peers are assessing your work. And each one of those is applying a rubric to your work. They're scoring how much creative thought they are seeing in your work. Now, any one of their scores, is probably not to be trusted. Any single student, there's a lot of variability and a lot of unreliability at the single student level. But when you average 5 or more peer assessments, and this has been shown repeatedly in research, if you average 5 or more peer assessments, the average score tends to be a very good estimate of the student's skill. So if we take those 5 people who scored you for creative thought, and we look at their average score for creative thought, that average is a good measure of how creative your composition was. Okay, this is very important because if we want to emphasize skill learning on our campuses, universities measure things. They credential things. That's what we do. And so if we can measure these skills as they develop, we can do things like badge them. We could give a badge to the people that are in the top 5 or 10% of creativity in a class, if that's what the assignment was about. We could credential it in some way. And certainly we could use it to reflectively think about how we're developing skills. If we're getting measures of skills, we can start to think about, well, what is impacting those measures? What sorts of experiences are causing, increases in creative thought or critical thinking? So this is, all of the potential that the ability to measure a skill brings up. And that's really, I think it's the future, to be honest. I think this is a place where we can push what we're doing in education in really cool ways. So starting professors to think about that potential is a really good thing, I think. Okay. Now, imagine you have a faculty member, you're working with them, you've given them my pitch about rubrics, and they think, yeah, I want to use a rubric. Well, now I would say there are rubrics and there are rubrics. And what I mean by this is from my own interactions with faculty. I've seen that some care mostly about those educational benefits, that ear training stuff and structuring it. They see that, and that's what they really care about. And sometimes what they want students to look for is odd in some cases. Well, I shouldn't say odd. I have a guitar instructor that uses peerScholar, and students submit videos of themselves playing guitar. And he has a rubric that he has created all about the factors that constitute strong guitar playing. And so it's an 18-point rubric. So he has students go through this. So he's got a pet rubric that he likes. And it works for his activity, and that's great. I've had other instructors say, well, my task is really about, and it's some sort of, I don't want to say strange thing, but uncommon thing, but they have a rubric for it, or they're willing to create a rubric for it. They say, I want to create this rubric that guides what students do. That's all great. If it's the educational benefits you're after, fantastic. Almost any rubric will do. Any well-structured rubric will give students that practice. So fantastic. If measurement is the goal, if you do want to start using those peer averages as an actual measure of the skills the students have, in that case, you should encourage the faculty member to see if there are any validated rubrics for the skill they want to measure, and there probably are. I show on the right here the Association for American Colleges and Universities, AAC&U, has had a project ongoing for a while that they call the Value Project, and they've created value rubrics, and they really relate to the sorts of skills that we typically want to teach students. So these rubrics have been created, and they've been shown to be valid. If you get the same individual to score the same piece on repeated occasions, they give the same score. So you can trust the scores from these rubrics. And these are the ones that you should suggest. If we're going to measure, then you should use one of these validated rubrics. And you should also be very careful to make sure that the task that you give students aligns with the rubric. If you're going to have them applying a creative thinking rubric, well, then make sure that the task is one where the students understand they're supposed to be displaying their creativity. And if it's critical thought, make sure they understand they're supposed to be displaying their ability to do critical analysis of something. So if you have that alignment and you have the good rubric and you have at least 5 peers scoring each piece, those are the components that you need to really trust the peer averages as measures of the skill. So if that's the goal, you should go that route. Now, just a final word, in peerScholar world, this measurement thing is a big thing for us, and we're going to be over time altering the application to be more sensitive to this, or to be more, I don't know, focused on it, I guess. So we will be doing things like when professors create assessments, they can tag those assessments as related to certain skills. So if they use a critical thinking rubric, they can tag that this is a critical thinking measure that they're doing. And the importance of that is we also have an administrative interface. So if a bunch of professors are using peerScholar, the data that they're generating all flows up to an admin level dash. And so we're going to be flowing all these critical thinking scores, creative thinking scores, everything that people are measuring at your institution, and then performing machine learning AI things on it to look for patterns and such. So that's going to be a big area of development in peerScholar, which is the other reason I like to introduce it now. If you get people kind of using rubrics at your institution and aware of it, then when these new features roll out, you'll be ready. You'll have the culture already developed. Okay, so that's it for video 2.1. Just giving you the sense that, when a faculty member comes in, get them thinking about having their students use rubrics, and let them know the educational benefits, and also maybe, start seeding this notion of the ability to measure, and getting that into people's minds. Okay, cool. That's it for this video. Have a great day. See you on the next one. Bye-bye.